What's up, everyone? Dylan here, and I want to do a real quick update on something kind of crypto related, but kind of to the side. Anyways, I want to talk today about the Andrew Tate ban and my thoughts on it, my thoughts on him, his message, and everything like that. So let's get into the video. We're gonna make it quick today. Recently Andrew Tate was banned off of Instagram, Facebook, I think TikTok, Twitter, basically all the platforms. And then YouTube is working to take down videos. TikTok is working to take down videos that people are posting of him because it's really a question mark. Some people say they have the answer, and right, some people claim that he is, a sexist, misogynist, racist, hateful individual, right? And I think that opinion can be formed fairly easily if you just look at the clips and look at things taken out of context that he says, or if you have a very closed-minded view on certain topics, right? And you are not open to different people's opinions or nuances in people's arguments. Now, I'm not saying I agree with everything he has to say, nor am I saying that everything he has to say is truthful, but I think he has a lot of valid points, and I think his perspective is a totally valid perspective to have in the world. Right? I don't think he calls for hate or anything like that against anyone. I don't think he calls for violence against anyone. I think his core message from videos and things that I've listened to him talk on, especially long form videos, not just clips. It's so easy for clips for someone to take a clip of something someone says and clip it out of context and then manufacture something, manufacture an emotional response they want people to have towards certain things that isn't actually the truth, right? We live our lives on social media that is incredibly curated, right? All for the algorithm, right? We don't, if you haven't thought about this, but so many people, so many content creators are purely creating the content that they do, not because it's true, not because it's valuable, but are valuable objectively, but because it's subjectively valuable for the algorithm. I've talked about this before. Like, you may start a lot of creators start out creating content because they like it, they love it, right? They are passionate about it, they're skilled, they're talented. But then the algorithm starts giving them feedback, right? Like whispering in their ear, if you can imagine that, and directing how they want to, how they should start creating, right? Start posting, and it's all to fuel that algorithm. So over time, right? The content they create is no longer like the content that they would have created on their own. It's been inspired and taken over by what the algorithm says that people want to hear, right? And so they're no longer creating content from like that they believe in, right? They're creating content to appease the social media monster that is, when you get thousands and thousands, hundred thousands, or millions of followers, right? You're not creating content for yourself; you're creating content for them, and so I think that can create a huge issue. I think it can create a lot of issues with creators. There's lots of stories about people being disillusioned by it because what makes them money, what gets them views, what gets them clicks is no longer what they believe in, but they have to do it anyways. Otherwise, they lose their account, they lose their business. That kind of stuff happens. So we have this influence over us that is this kind of collective or this collective algorithm, this collective platform that influences our choices, our decisions, and our content online. And I think more and more, and this is why the ban is important to understand, is, like I said, you don't have to agree with his Tate's statements. You don't have to agree with it. I think you should hear them and listen to them. And if you don't agree, come up with reasons why, rather than just like doing ad hominem attacks and saying like, oh, you're a misogynist. Well, why? Why is he, right? In what ways are his ideas flawed or wrong? Or is it okay if some people have those perspectives and other people don't, right? Why should someone not believe him? Why should someone have a different perspective, right? Make your case, right? Rather than just trying to get someone banned or censored, right? Make a case for why it isn't. No, you don't have to come and attack someone. Make a case for why some of his ideas are wrong, some of his statements are wrong. There was a debate that he had about basically it was about women driving, and his claim was that women are worse at driving, and then the opposite claim was that the evidence suggests that no, women are better at driving, right? The data suggests that. Right, but in his subjective view, they're worse, and then in the evidence suggested that they were better at driving. Well, I think that's a valid conversation to have, right? Because a lot of people base their realities in their lives off of their subjective views, and they don't consider the evidence. A lot of people only consider the evidence, and the evidence doesn't paint the whole picture. So I think bringing those things together is very important. I think that conversation is important to have, and it's okay if someone is wrong, right? And it's okay for the audience or the viewers to listen to a discussion and then pick which one they agree with, pick who made the more compelling case. I mean, this goes back to what is it, the Socratic method, right? I think it's Socratic method. I think where basically like you have open debates, right, between ideas. You ask questions, right? Continue to ask questions to get to the root of the idea, and the one with the idea that's wrong will be found out in the end, right? People come to the table with their positions, and then they challenge each other. I think it's so important, right? And if you start silencing or banning these conversations because they're too controversial, or someone maybe get offended or triggered by these conversations because of the reach of the internet, I think that's a really dangerous precedent, because what you're doing is you're curating the type of conversations that people are allowed to have. And when you do that, I think what happens is you end up with people that only support the narrative, right? The feedback that the algorithm is saying, right? The feedback that the algorithm is saying, hey, this is the type of content that we want, that we'll promote, and this is the bad content. So people start conforming their content, their talking points, their personalities, right? Their whole livelihoods, even people who don't, but just who agree with those things, who are in alignment with those things, they start rising to prominence, not because their ideas are better, not because anything like that, but because there's an incentive. So an example you can think of in this situation is the sport of fencing, right? Fencing started out like a sword fighting, but then as humans applied pressure, right, constraints via rules of how you score points in fencing, fencing has then morphed. The strategies and techniques of the sport of fencing have morphed to be what it is today. Now, the techniques in fencing by no means, right, would win in a normal sword fight, right? It wouldn't work, right? If you were in a normal sword fight with a fencer, someone who's skilled with that, those skills are not directly applicable to an actual sword fight. They are only applicable to the realm of fencing, right? They're overcorrected. They overfitted. It's called like overfitting the curve, right? So they've overfit the parameters for what they were told that they have to meet, right? And so you get that with a lot of content nowadays. And so when you start pushing, right, when you start putting these constraints and parameters on things, right, what's left with the people that don't fit into those parameters, that have different ideas or different types of things, they don't get the exposure, right? Or if they're too counter to it, right, and you find them to be a problem, this is true. Like, these platforms can do this, right? If there's a problem, right, or there's someone seen as a problem, well, these platforms have centralized control where they can just flip a switch and ban the person, right? They can coordinate, they can collude to stop ideas, to stop topics, to stop people that they think are a threat to whatever narrative they want to push. Which, if you don't see the problem in that, right, maybe it hasn't turned against you yet, but it always turns against you, right? It's always, you're never going to always be in the position of right unless you have no position at all, and you never stand your ground, and you just only conform to what you're told to do, right? And that's a huge issue, right? So anyways, as they put these constraints on these platforms and start banning people, the people that are left, I think, fall into two main categories, right? The first category are the people that support the narrative, right? Either just because that's what they are, that's the type of person they are, and that's okay, right? People are allowed to have different ideas, different views, or because they realize that if they don't support it, they'll be kicked off, right? So they've conformed to supporting that narrative. And then you have the people that are in opposition to the narrative, but they have to curate and censor enough of their speech so that they don't fall too far out of line. They don't become too much of a problem to where they kicked off and lose their platforms. So the result is you get, in my opinion, you get one-sided speech, and you get a very curated speech. So one side, if you're on the pro-narrative side of the arguments, right, you can say whatever you want, right, to support that. You're free and open to say all the things that support that narrative, right? And the narrative, of course, is going to embrace those and encourage that, right? But if you're against it, you are basically fighting with your one hand or two hands tied behind your back, right? Because there's a lot of things you can't say, a lot of information you can't reveal, and that creates a huge problem, because that doesn't allow for free and open discussion, right? It doesn't allow for free and open discourse. And you see this going on all the time, and more and more and more. So that's why I wanted to talk about and bring up this ban. And I wanted to, I probably should end this video here shortly so it doesn't go too long. But that's what bans like this represent, at least in my mind, right? Is that someone was speaking out against, that, and with views that were in opposition to a main narrative, right? Or offended a lot of people. And most of the time when people are offended, right, they're offended not because they've actually done the research, but because they see a clip, a headline, and it channels something in them, and they get emotional and they react to it rather than actually doing the research and actually combing through and seeing, taking the time to study something and figure out, hey, is this true or is it not true, right? Where do I agree or where do I disagree, right? Most outrage just comes from just a quick emotional emotional response rather than any sort of like deep thought or consideration on a topic and or deep research into something. So I think it really highlights that that is going on and that is going on. So it's important to realize that that's the environment that we're in. If you're watching this video on a social media platform, right, that's the environment that you're in. And I think a lot of people don't take a step back and realize that the information, things that you're being shown, the things that you see is manicured, right, in one way or another. And there are people with their own ideas, their own interests that have influence over those protocols, over what you can and cannot see. So I think that's why this is so important. So someone like Andrew Tate being banned, right, it represents that. It represents this kind of culture war that we're in. It represents that you're not allowed to freely speak your mind, right? If it's in opposition to a narrative, especially because we've seen, if you look at I can't say too much, right? This is an example of someone who's saying something that's maybe counter to the narrative, but if you say too much, right, at the wrong time, you get banned, you get censored because there's AI systems in place that search out for this type of speech. But there were narratives that you weren't allowed to talk about a few years ago, but then now data is coming out and now policies are changing, so you can talk about those things, right? And you can go look those up. You can find those. I think maybe you might know what I'm talking about, or you can get the hint for some things. So policies change, right? People realize that they were wrong, or they realize after the fact, hey, maybe we're gonna change the rules. Maybe we weren't right, or maybe there's not enough of a reason to keep this ban or keep this restriction or keep this censoring of this type of conversation at this point in time. So you have people that are selectively adding censorship for whatever suits them, their goals, their narrative, and you have that in play, right, for better or for worse on these platforms. So I think that's important to know. So how does this all relate to crypto? Back to crypto, Bitcoin, everything like that. So a huge thing in the space is talking about censorship resistance, right? Getting money out of the hands of people that can control and manipulate the money, right? That's why something like Bitcoin has so much promise, has so much potential, has so many people around the world excited about it and promoting it, is because it can be something that is truly censorship resistant, to where there's no centralized entity that can control how you spend your money, how you get access to your money, that can manipulate the money supply to their benefit to your detriment. And that's extremely, extremely powerful. It's an extremely powerful idea, because these platforms that we're on right now, that you're listening to this video on, right, they are not censorship resistant, right? We live in a world that is highly censored, and you don't even know where it's coming from all the time, right? You might not even realize that things are being censored because you're only exposed to one side, one perspective, one point of view. But if we can move to a system, or if we can have an alternative to where there's not that censorship, right? And if something with money, right? Money is fundamental to how we work, right? So much of our decisions in our lives are based upon money, because what we want to do with money is we don't want more money. We want more of what money can get us, right? Money is basically like a call option on the productivity of a society. So you can convert your time, your energy into those call options that you can use and leverage in the future, right? That's very, very powerful. And we as humans, like we've decided that that's something that we really, really value. And so if we can move the corruption out of that, right, remove the censorship out of that realm, who knows what else is possible? Who knows what other layers of censorship will be removed, and allow for more of that free and open discourse, so that true ideas, the best ideas, can come to the surface through that discussion, through that discourse, and so people aren't being silenced unnecessarily. Because anytime you paint something with a broad brush, like you're gonna leave people out that shouldn't be left out. So anyways, I'm just going to conclude that here. So I think it's important going forward, to pay attention to these things, pay attention to these bans, pay attention to ideas you see people emotionally reacting to. And if you emotionally react to the ideas, you don't have to agree with them. I just think you should study them and understand them before you express serious outrage on the topic. Like really, really look into them, right? And have nuanced conversations, have discussions, because something is going to outrage you like that, right? It's probably something that's worth talking about, right? It's probably a discussion worth having versus worth silencing people for. And it's okay if people have different perspectives and different points of views, right? Totally fine, because everyone has different backgrounds, different personal experiences, different wants, needs, desires, values. All that stuff comes to the surface in these discussions, and it's important to have those, because then you get to see those point of views. You get to see, hey, there's a real person on the other side of this. And they're not necessarily a bad person. They just have a different view, right? Some people like chicken, some people like steak, some people don't like meat at all. It's okay. All those are valid views. But if you say, hey, you're not allowed to talk about liking chicken, like we just don't, it's not cool, right? You don't get to have your point of view. Well, then you're missing out on a huge opportunity to learn and to grow and for those ideas to come to the surface. So anyways, pay attention to the Tate ban. I don't think it's necessarily warranted. I hope that he gets the platform back. I think, he's addressed, there's a video out there of him talking about the ban. I think he has learned some things from this, so maybe that's a good thing, right? So that he can improve, he can be more succinct with his message, where he may be a little bit less bombastic with his message. But I think his ideas and stuff are important to talk about, right? Especially if they create that emotional response. I think people need to engage with those ideas, because if you disagree, right, you should create solid arguments to refute those points, refute those ideas, so that people aren't being misled. Right? If you agree, right, you should create solid points to support those ideas, right? So that people aren't being misled the other way. So I think it's important and healthy discussion to have. And I think moving towards less censorship, more free and open communication and platforms, I think is key. And that's why one of the reasons why I'm working in the Bitcoin and crypto space, because I believe that's one of the things that can help us get there. So anyways, hopefully you enjoy this video. Let me know what you think about the ban in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.